What's going on today, guys? So I've got a wheel bearing that I need to replace in the 350Z, and I figured I'd show you how to not necessarily replace the wheel bearing, but how to put ARP studs inside the wheel bearing. So the first thing that I needed to do was to knock out the old studs, the studs that came in this, and all you need to do is set it down on the floor on a hard surface like concrete and just lightly pound the studs down, and they'll fall out the bottom. And next, I've got these ARP studs. These things are extremely strong. They're really good for racing. They're long so that I can put a spacer before I put the wheel on the car. So all you need to do is slide this up through here, but then you need to have something to be able to create pressure against this surface here with a nut so that you can tighten it back up into the hub. So I'll show you what I do. All right, guys, so I wanted to show you what a bad wheel bearing looks like. This is a really bad wheel bearing. It came off of a 350Z. It was on my son's car. It started making noise. He was like, "Dad, something's going on." I took the car around the block. I'm like, "Yeah, you've got a bad wheel bearing, I think." Jacked the front end of the car up, wiggled the wheel. Sure enough, bad wheel bearing. So ultimately what I did is I took a wheel bearing off my race car, gave it to my son because I knew it was only about a year old, and then I ordered a brand new one for the race car. But let's take a look at this wheel bearing, and I'll show you what it looks like. So this wheel bearing right here is bad, and I don't know if you can see it, but it's wobbling. And inside here, you know, everything's just kind of, the grease got worn out. And you can feel it, it's really stiff and clunky, and it's just completely worn out. And so this wheel bearing at some point in time was gonna fail so bad that the whole entire hub probably would have came out, could have caused some major issues. The way that these are built, that really shouldn't happen, but it can. So, you know, the second he told me there was an issue, I was like, let's make sure that it's not something that's, you know, imperatively needing to be done. Ultimately, it needed to be done. It was the Super Bowl day. After the Super Bowl, we ran down here to the shop, pulled the wheel bearing out of the race car, put it in his car. The whole entire thing only took us about 30 minutes. It's really not that hard to take a wheel bearing out of a 350Z and put one back in. So one of the biggest issues with trying to get this up into here is if I just take a standard nut. Now, this is a long one, long threads, and it's steel, but you see how it's tapered. If I just go straight down onto here, that taper ends up pushing down inside here, and it kind of flattens the taper out. And ultimately, it can't seat the lug all the way up into the hub. I have found a big nut that this kind of fits in pretty good, and so it ends up being able to, this is a flat end, and so the flat end goes on the flat end with this hub, so it's not trying to spread this part out or flatten it. It's not going to just sit there and dig it into the hub. This part is flush with the hub, so it creates a good pressure. So I put the stud inside the hub, I take my nut and I put the nut down, and then I tighten my lug nut down on top of that so it's flat. So now you can see that this surface here is flat. So I'm going to be able to get as much compression between these two surfaces as possible so that we can get this seated all the way up inside the hub. And then this marries to this quite well so that as this compresses, you know, I've got a lot of threads all the way up in there already. So as this compresses, it's just going to pull this up into the hub. Now this is a pretty loud process, and it's metal on metal, and you've got the gun going to crazy. So I like to put a little bit of ear protection in my ears because I've got to do this 5 times. And on a car, if it's something you're doing for the first time, you're going to be doing it 20 times, so protect your ears. So sometimes my gun even runs out of power, isn't quite strong enough to suck that all the way up against this hub face. But you've got to make sure that you get it completely snug all the way up against the hub face, because if you don't, then, you know, over time it's going to start like loosening a little bit, or every time you torque your wheel and go out on a track, it gets hot. It starts to seat that stud all the way up onto the back face of this hub, and then, you know, you start getting loose wheels. So it's really important that you get this taken care of, because, you know, any vibration stuff is just going to make this wheel bearing go bad again faster. So we want to try to make sure that we get these seated as good as possible. Got a really strong 17mm socket, and I can just start snugging this up. Almost all the way. you want to make sure you have a lug nut that's got quite a few threads in it. You want to make sure it gets threaded down onto that stud pretty far, because if not, you're going to destroy the lug nut, because these studs are strong. The steel that they use on these is strong, and these will, just completely destroy the threads inside here. So this isn't a lug nut that I'm going to reuse on my race car. I just kind of specifically use this lug nut for this type of application. But having that flat surface, having something that kind of is in between, the lug nut and the stud, so that it can kind of seat that up. But as you can see, there's quite a bit of thread material there that this is going to thread down on. It was about to there, and then as it brings this up into here, it compresses the rest of the way. But that way you're utilizing a lot of threads inside this and not ruining your lug nut. So I hope that helps anybody out there that's looking at putting in ARP studs inside their wheel bearings, inside their hubs. This is kind of the best way I've found to do it. I don't know, I think there's other tools out there that you can utilize. There's actual tools that probably do this, but for somebody that when you're out at the track and you need to be able to replace a stud or something like that, you have to kind of get crafty. And so this is what I came up with, and it seems to work every single time. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please click subscribe below. So here's the car with the new wheel bearing that I just pressed these studs into. I literally probably did it about 7 minutes ago, pressing the studs in, and here we are. We're already back to a full upright. I just need to put the disc back on, put the caliper back over the top of the disc, and we're good to go. So it's really not that hard of a project. It's really important to do. I replace wheel bearings in the race car all the time. The rear ones are definitely a little bit more difficult to get to, and we're going to be doing ARP studs in my son's car soon, so we'll go through and kind of show you how to do that. It's always nice to know, and these studs are awesome to have in a car. Well, I hope all this information is helpful to anybody out there that's looking to do this. And building the race car and working on the race car is always fun. Sometimes, I want to make videos on a lot of stuff, and I get tied up and I forget to do the video, but hopefully this helps, and I hope you guys have a good one. Hopefully I'll see you guys out there on track, or if not at my track, hopefully you guys are having a good time out at yours.